Title: The Farm vs. the HOA Tyrant. I never thought my chickens would get me involved in a police incident. But when Karen, the self-appointed queen of our neighborhood, called the cops, things took a turn she never expected. Moving to the countryside had been my dream. After years of city life, noise, traffic, and landlords who made life miserable, I finally bought a modest property on the outskirts of a quiet town. The land was perfect: wide open spaces, fresh air, and enough room to raise a few animals. I wasn't running a full-scale farm. I had just a handful of chickens for eggs, a couple of goats for milk, and my old dog, Rusty, who spent most of his days lounging on the porch, enjoying retirement. Life was peaceful. That is until Karen entered the picture. Karen was my next-door neighbor, though I hesitate to call her that. She didn't live next door so much as she reigned over the street from her McMansion like a dictator overseeing her domain. Even though our neighborhood didn't have an HOA, Karen acted like she ran one. She had rules, her own rules, and she expected everyone to follow them. At first, it was little things. Passive-aggressive comments about my unkempt grass. Complaints about my mailbox not matching the others on the street. Unsolicited lectures on proper community standards. I ignored her. Then she turned her attention to my animals. That's when the real trouble started. Karen was persistent. When I refused to get rid of my animals, she escalated. First, it was anonymous notes taped to my fence. Livestock is not allowed in a residential neighborhood. Your chickens are a health hazard. Your goats are lowering property values. Then, she started slipping printed HOA-style violation notices under my door. The best part? We didn't even have an HOA. At first, I laughed them off. The county zoning laws clearly allowed small farm animals, and without a real HOA, Karen had no power to enforce her fake rules. But Karen wasn't one to back down. And when she realized I wasn't afraid of her, she went nuclear. One morning, I heard shouting outside. I stepped onto my porch and saw Karen standing at my fence, clutching her phone, yelling into it like she was reporting a crime in progress. It wasn't until I walked closer that I realized she was talking to the police. Yes, I need an officer immediately. Wild animals are running loose. It's a disaster waiting to happen. I shook my head, chuckling. Karen, my animals are in a fenced area. They're not running loose. She ignored me, raising her voice. There are large, aggressive animals terrorizing the neighborhood. I looked over at my aggressive animals. The goats were lazily chewing grass. The chickens clucked peacefully in their coop. Rusty, my dog, was asleep on his back, basking in the sun, the real menace of the neighborhood. 10 minutes later, 2 police officers pulled up. Karen rushed toward them, waving her arms dramatically as if she had just survived an active war zone. "Thank God you're here," she gasped. "This man is keeping wild livestock in a residential area. His animals are dangerous. They've been terrorizing the neighborhood." I folded my arms. That's a complete lie. One of the officers, a middle-aged man with a skeptical expression, turned to me. "Sir, are you keeping farm animals here?" "Yes," I replied, "and they're perfectly legal." Karen gasped. "You're just going to take his word for it? Look around. Chickens. Goats. It's a nightmare." The younger officer scratched his head. "Ma'am, having farm animals isn't a crime." Karen's face turned red. "It should be. They're bringing down property values." The older officer sighed. "That's not a police matter, ma'am." I walked to my mailbox and pulled out a copy of the county's zoning laws. "Here," I said, handing it to the officer. "According to local regulations, I'm allowed to have small livestock as long as they're properly contained." "Which they are." The officer skimmed the document and nodded. "Yep, looks like everything is in order." Karen looked ready to explode. "This is outrageous. You're supposed to be upholding the law." The officer crossed his arms. "Ma'am, no laws are being broken here." Karen's jaw dropped. "What about noise complaints?" "The animals are constantly making a racket." The younger officer glanced at the mostly silent animals except for a lone chicken softly clucking. "Doesn't seem too noisy to me." Karen was livid. "So you're just going to let him get away with this?" The officer sighed. "Ma'am, unless you have an actual legal complaint, we're done here." Karen clenched her fists. "Fine. If the police won't do something, then I will." And that's when she made the worst mistake of her life. Before anyone could react, Karen stormed past the officers and stomped right onto my property. "You want to keep these filthy animals? Fine. I'll handle it myself. She kicked over a bucket of feed, sending grain flying everywhere. The goats scattered in surprise. Rusty jumped up, barking. I raised my hands. Karen, you just stepped onto my property. That's trespassing. She scoffed. So what? I'm just helping clean up this mess. The older officer sighed, reaching for his radio. Ma'am, you need to leave the property immediately. Karen rolled her eyes. Oh, please. What are you going to do? Arrest me for caring about my community? The officer's expression hardened. Actually, yes. Karen froze. Wait, what? Before she could react, the officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Ma'am, you're under arrest for trespassing and destruction of property. Karen's face turned ghostly white. You can't be serious, she screeched. The officer nodded at me. Do you want to press charges? I smiled. Oh, absolutely. Karen's arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. By the time the police cruiser pulled out of my driveway, half the street had gathered to watch the spectacle. Phones were out. Pictures were taken. And within hours, a mugshot of Karen in handcuffs was circulating on the local neighborhood Facebook group. Her expression? Pure outrage. The comments were glorious. Wait, did Karen actually get arrested? Finally, someone put a stop to her HOA nonsense. Trespassing and destroying property. She deserves it. I'm going to frame this mugshot. It didn't take long for Karen's friends, mostly a small clique of HOA wannabes, to try to defend her. She was just trying to protect the neighborhood. The police totally overreacted, but no one was buying it. People were sick of her. And the best part? This was just the beginning of Karen's downfall. While Karen was busy trying to talk her way out of a criminal charge, I decided to go on the offensive. I filed a formal complaint with the county about Karen's fake HOA notices and her illegal attempt to enforce non-existent regulations. Turns out, I wasn't the only one. Over the next few days, several homeowners came forward with their own complaints. Joe from 3 houses down had been fined $500 for having a lawn gnome. Lisa and her husband had been threatened with legal action for painting their front door blue. An elderly couple had been harassed about their garden until they considered moving. The county took notice, and soon, an official investigation was launched into Karen's activities. 2 weeks after her arrest, Karen returned home. But things weren't the same. Her fake authority had crumbled. The county had ruled that she had no legal standing to issue HOA fines because, again, our neighborhood didn't even have an HOA. And then came the audit. Turns out, Karen had been collecting HOA fees from several naive homeowners who believed they were required to pay them. Thousands of dollars. Gone. The county ordered her to repay every cent. And when she couldn't, her house went into foreclosure. A month later, Karen's house was empty. Her belongings? Auctioned off to cover her debts. Her car? Repossessed. Her once pristine front lawn? Now overgrown and abandoned. And just like that, the self-proclaimed HOA queen was gone. Without Karen, the neighborhood thrived. People started painting their doors whatever color they wanted. Lawn gnomes multiplied. And my farm? Bigger than ever. One afternoon, my neighbor Joe walked up, hands in his pockets, grinning at my newly expanded chicken coop. So, he said, shaking his head, you really won, huh? I looked around, at my land, my animals, and the Karen-free street. I smiled. Yeah, I really did.